Thank you so much to all of you for attending today and for your interest in our legislative agenda, and specifically the topic of TANF and how Tennessee is going to be looking at alternative ways for spending those dollars and for helping the citizens of Tennessee who need that assistance. I know we have several legislators on the call, so especially want to give thanks to you for being on here, for your interest, and for your service. A couple housekeeping points. This is a webinar format, which means your video and the chat box are disabled, but we encourage you to ask questions and to provide comments if you'd like through the Q&A box, which is also at the bottom of the Zoom screen. We've already had several questions submitted. We'll take those up in the order they were received, and we apologize if we can't get to all of them. But if you do submit a question, you may be asked to unmute yourself, introduce yourself and your organization, and actually ask that question of our legislative panelists. A reminder, the webinar is being recorded and will be made available at a future date. And then as you see on the screen now, a quick run through of the agenda. We will have a good discussion and a Q&A on TANF, the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program. Then we'll talk about two other legislative priorities for TQEE and the Child Care Task Force committee, as well as funding for school nurses. And again, we'll have a short Q&A round for that. Right now, I want to get right to it so that you all have time to ask questions, so that you actually listen to the folks who you are attending this webinar to actually hear from. And that is from Senator Bo Watson of Hickson, right outside of Chattanooga, and Representative David Hawk from Greenville, Tennessee. They are the sponsors of the TANF bill, which, if you're tracking, is House Bill 137, Senate Bill 144. And we'd just love to hear from them about their work on the TANF working group, the TANF issue, and just their background and thoughts in general. And with that, gentlemen, legislators, thank you so much for being with us.
Hey, well, thanks, Lee, and thank you to everyone who is on the call or on the webinar. Thanks for taking part of your day to listen to us discuss what I believe Representative Hawk and I think is a good strategic approach of how we might use the TANF funds. I'll do a quick summary of how we got to where we are, and then I'll yield to my good friend, Representative Hawk, and he can discuss some aspects of the bill, and we can kind of go back and forth, and then Blair and Lee can correct us when we've made a mistake along the way. If you will remember, about a year ago, there was a report out that TANF in Tennessee had this incredible reserve, what we will term a reserve. It's not an actual reserve, but an incredible amount of reserve or capacity in the neighborhood of $700 to $750 million. And we put together a task force that included both legislative and executive branch members, chaired by Representative Brian Terry, to evaluate how we were utilizing those dollars and if there were other ways that we might utilize the dollars. Historically, Tennessee gets about $191 million a year in TANF funding. And over the years, for various reasons, we don't always spend all that money. And what we don't spend goes into this capacity reserve. And over the years, that reserve had built up to this $750 million amount. The task force was evaluating how we might use the money. A couple of things came out of that. One was $50 million to go to some two-generation grant funds. But we then got hit by the pandemic and sort of got knocked off course. Fortunately, Representative Hawk and I and the folks from TQEE were able to discern enough information from those task force that it allowed us to create a strategic approach that we will present to the legislature on how we might utilize those funds in a very conservative and judicious way, and maximize the funds so that we get the biggest bang for our buck, and utilize it in the way that we think Tennesseans can best gain from those. So here we are. We have a bill that outlines for the members and for the public how we would propose utilizing the TANF funds moving forward. With that, I'll yield to my good friend from the House, which I'm an alumnus of, Representative Hawk. Take it away, David.
Thank you very much, Senator Watson. Bo, we appreciate you and would love to have you back over in the House if you'd ever like to come back again.
They won't have me. They won't have me.
I understand. And thank you so much. We have learned a tremendous amount over the last year about the TANF program, about the ins and outs of what's going on. And the proposal we have is going to carve out initially $300 million from the nearly $750 million available funds that we have in the TANF program. And we're going to create an advisory council that's going to give us a fresh set of eyes and ears to discern what may or may not need to be going on with these TANF funds. And that's going to be one of the first steps. Additionally, as we look to enable communities, each county across the state of Tennessee to put some resources toward what's important to them, we're going to put additional dollars at a county level, at a local level, back to some programs that local governments find are useful to them. These are all going to go through our not-for-profits. So I feel like we've got an opportunity to put forth a reasonable spending plan. As Senator Watson had mentioned, we are a conservative state, but these are dollars that are available to us. And while we've got some needs across our communities, if there's a project that is working in one county or one community or one region of Tennessee, let's not reinvent the wheel. I'm all about stealing, borrowing great ideas that other communities have and replicating them statewide. That's what I would like to see happen with the proposals that we're going to be accepting. And as the advisory committee gets set up and starts the discernment process, that they'll be looking for as well. So just in a nutshell, that's kind of where we are with the dollars and cents. And I think, Blair, it's your turn to give us an idea of the TQEE aspect and participation in this.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, gentlemen, both of you so very much, Senator Watson and Representative Hawk. This is these funds are an incredibly important resource. They have been underutilized, and you all have really stepped up with thoughtful and bold leadership to address the matter, and we're grateful. So thank you for that. I'm going to take about 6 minutes or so, timed myself so I could keep it tight, to just add a little bit more to what Representative Hawk said, just kind of give a quick flyby of the bill section by section, and hitting really on kind of the three main parts of the bill. So I'm just going to add a little bit more to what Representative Hawk said in an effort to answer some of the questions that we've seen coming through from you all. And then we'll go into questions. We've gotten a number of them in advance, and we'll get to that here in very shortly, and we'll call on you to address your questions. So with that, let me quickly just context, sort of what are these, it's called temporary assistance for needy families. So what is the need here? Half of children in Tennessee ages 0 to 8, and that's more than 350 children, it's about 358 children, live in households with incomes below 200% of poverty level. That is $52,000 annually for a family of 2 adults and 2 children. Compare that to what the United Ways of Tennessee's ALICE study tells us, which is that a survival budget for that same family of 4 is $65,000 a year. It's a survival budget. The ALICE study also said that 47% of all Tennessee households report being one emergency away from financial ruin. And that all that data I just mentioned was pre-COVID. So we know that things have only worsened as a result of the pandemic. And as we are Tennesseans for Quality Early Education, I do want to note what is very well known probably to everybody on this webinar, which is that there's such a strong correlation between economic disadvantage and education outcomes. We also know there's well-documented evidence that investments in early childhood development and education, 0 to 8, but especially before age 5, have a very high return on investment. And we also know that 2-gen approaches that provide supports for both children and their parents at the same time can be very cost-effective if they're implemented well. So enter TANF, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. Just a quick, it's a very, very flexible block grant. from the federal government. We get about 191 million every single year, Tennessee does. And it can be used for a broad range of services that can help families overcome hardship, ranging from childcare, evidence-based home visiting. There's a basic cash assistance program, which many of you are familiar with, and sometimes this has been colloquially referred to as welfare payments. It can pay for after-school and tutoring initiatives. It can pay for mental health counseling and substance abuse services, job training, emergency help for families in crisis like housing supports. So very flexible, lots of uses. So now let's talk about the bill. Three things. The bill, the three main things. It establishes a reasonable reserve. It provides, as Representative Hawk mentioned, 300 million of that reserve over 3.5 years for the Tennessee Opportunity Pilot Initiative. And number three, it stipulates that going forward that the funds must be used, so not stockpiled, and they must go to where the need is. And I'm going to briefly touch on each one of those. So Jonathan, if you would put up, please put up the slide that shows the reserve, comparative reserve with other states. Okay, great, thank you. So this bill requires that a reserve be set at a very reasonable 191 million. That's a year's worth of block grant. You can see on this slide, and I'm gonna scoot it up so it's bigger on my screen, and you all might want to do that too. But you can see on this screen, this shows all 50 states and as their reserve as a share of their annual federal TANF block grant. This is 2019 information. And you can see at the far left, Tennessee has by far the largest surplus in the nation at 383% of our annual TANF block grant. You can also see that red line going across horizontally. That's 100% of the TANF block grant, and 40 of 50 states currently fall below 100%. So that proposed by Watson Hawk bill, Tennessee at 100%, 191 million, would still have us at 10th highest in the nation. So fairly conservative still there. And if you're looking at Southeast states, 12 of them, kind of our sister states here, we would still be third largest of the 12 Southeastern states. And this is for 2019. This could have adjusted this year. We know over 2020, our state's TANF surplus actually increased from 732 million to 741 million. It is very likely that a lot of our fellow states have tapped into their TANF reserves further. So that's important to note. So it would move Tennessee from number 1 to number 10 largest in the nation with 2019 figures. It covers the equivalent of that 191 million reserve would cover the equivalent of 365 days, basically a year's worth of TANF operations, even though keeping in mind we've got a track record of only spending less than half that every year. And compare that to what are the other two? There's two big state reserves, and these are different types of reserves. The TANF reserve does not actually sit in our books on our balance sheet. It actually stays with the federal government till we draw it down. But Tennessee has two reserves that are on our books. One is the rainy day fund. One is the big TennCare reserve fund. And those two funds together, according to the Sycamore Institute, would cover about 33 days worth of state funded general fund operations. So covering a full 365 days worth of TANF operations is comparatively really quite conservative. So I think that's important. We know that our state government leans fiscally conservative. This bill really, and this reserve amount, proposed reserve amount, really acknowledges and reflects that conservatism. Secondly, the Tennessee Opportunity Pilot. This is what Representative Hawk was talking about. So the bill sets aside 300 million over 3.5 years. It obligates it pretty immediately, and it would be spent over 3.5 years for communities to design and implement strategic plans that would mitigate the effects of child poverty and promote family economic self-sufficiency. So these would be locally driven and designed. They would require 2-gen approaches, and they would actually use evidence-based. They are required to use evidence-based or evidence-informed solutions. There's a planning grant round, and then there's an implementation grant round, and the bill provides that 8 communities would be awarded, and these communities have to represent a mix of rural, urban, and suburban. And they can be, cities can be communities, counties, or multi-county regions. And then very importantly, the bill requires that all communities awarded these grants, these implementation grants, must participate in a research and evaluation component of their work. And they will do so together, and the administration, Department of Human Services, together with this advisory board that is established, would together enlist research partners for a partner or partners for that job. And by the way, this would not be research that just at the end of 3 years, we either find out things worked or they didn't work. This is a true research practice partnership where there's an engagement, course correction along the way. So it's not like, oops, we didn't spend that money very well after 3.5 years. It's an active process of continuous improvement and making sure we really are using those funds well throughout. And then Representative Hawk mentioned the bill's calls for an advisory panel appointed by the Speaker and Lieutenant Governor to work with DHS and the research partners. And one of their duties would be to, at the end, to recommend have a report with a set of recommendations for TANF use going forward. And then one last thing, the bill also calls for the advisory panel and DHS to engage TANF expertise, TANF experts to advise communities on best practices and allowed uses for TANF. We know there are a lot of questions about that out there. And so while there's great flexibility, compliance with the law, federal law will be very important. And so that kind of having that TANF expertise on hand will be invaluable to make sure these strategic plans really do meet the letter of the law, so to speak. And then lastly, the third major component addresses the use of the rest of the reserve in the ongoing TANF block grant, right? So setting aside, it sets aside, well, it speaks to the fact that we're going to set aside this $191 million reserve. We also recognize that administrative costs are a part of expenses. And so we set that aside. And then there's the cash assistance program, very important. That's set aside and the bill doesn't address that in any way. The rest of the funds would then have to be used in counties proportionally to their share of children in poverty. So ensuring the funding gets to where the need is. So with that, I hope I stayed in my 6 minutes. I think I did, or close to it. I'm going to stop there. And I am, unless Senator Watson or Representative Hawk want to make a comment, I'm going to go to questions. Gentlemen, is there any comment you'd like to make before I go to questions?
Well, probably most of the folks on this call don't know me and don't know how I operate, but I'm obviously a person who uses, in a sophisticated office like Representative Hawk has, I would probably have a whiteboard, but for me, I just use the large pieces of paper. Obviously, Representative Hawk and I are both on finance committees in the House and in the Senate. And so understanding the math of this is really important, and you can get lost in that in the language of the bill. So I don't know if you can see it or not, but I put the math up. So if you begin with about a $735 or so million capacity, the bill takes 191 million of those dollars and it's a set aside. So we move it over and we put it in a reserve account, and that will remain in that reserve account throughout the whole implementation of the law. If that reserve account drops because the department has to do unexpected spending, then in the next budget cycle, we've got to replenish that $191 million. So the objective of the bill is to keep that reserve at a year's worth of funding at all times. So that then draws down the capacity reserve to $544 million. We take $300 million, and this is where it gets a little tricky for folks. We take $300 million of that $544 million and set it aside for these pilot opportunity grants that will be developed over the next year. Of that $300 million, $5 million of that will be used to develop the program grants. So that will be used to design the different programs that we will ultimately fund. So if you look at my little board up here, it says 295. We take 300 million, take 5 million from that for program development, and it leaves you with $295 million, which means we've left with $241 million in this capacity reserve account. Once we take the 300 million out, again, that's going to be set aside to develop these grants, which will be used at the local level. There will be 8 of them developed across the state. They will be selected from a bunch of grant submissions that will be made both to the department and to this advisory board that we've set up. So let's say they go and all 95 counties come up with an idea, they submit those. The advisory board and the department will be required to select 8 of those. So you might have 95 ideas, but you only get to select 8 of them. And those 8 are funded for 3 years at $10 million a year. And they have a rigorous random controlled trial or something of a similar kind of study that accompanies them for the full duration of their grant, so we can determine whether they're really being effective or not. Okay, so just to retrace my steps one more time on the math, you start out with about 735 million. You set aside 191 million of that in your continuous reserve, leaves you 544 million. You take 300 million of that, and out of that 300 million, you develop your 8 pilot program grants, which will be funded over the course of 3 years. So in essence, we're leaving $249 million in the capacity reserve. Now, of the $191 million that the state gets every year, so we get $191 million every year. Once the state has completed its obligations of those $91 million, any money that's left over must be allocated at the local level. So that's where these other grant opportunities are created, because the department has a long history of not spending the $191 million totally. That's why we've got this huge balance remaining. That's where these other grants come in that will go to the local level to help implement other types of programs that we think would be beneficial to Tennesseans. At the end of the day, our objective is to maximize the $191 million that we receive every year to the benefit of all the counties all across the state of Tennessee.
And Bo, that was a great explanation, and I love the graphics that you put up. And as we're talking about no, I do, and your white paper beats my whiteboard every day of the week. So thank you very much. In that vein, as Senator Watson was talking about the 95 ideas from each of the counties, and I'm sure there may be more. That's where some of that, the last funding mechanism that he discussed can come into play. So even a great idea that doesn't make it to the final cut of those 8 projects that we're looking at still has an opportunity to get some funding, as we want to see these dollars spent as universally across the state of Tennessee as possible. We know there's pockets of need all across the state, and trying to address that in each community. And again, going back to each community knowing what is best for themselves. There may be a particular need that we that folks in Nashville have no idea is a particular need in community X, Y, and Z. So we want to allow communities to have that input and that say so in what they feel is important as well. So thank you very much, Senator Watson.
Yeah, those small grants that Representative Hawker referring to. So out of the 300 million, we take 5 million and we give out $500,000 grants all across the state for people to develop ideas that will then become eligible for the 8 community project grants that will be funded at $10 million a year for 3 years. And this is unique to legislation. We are requiring in the legislation that there be a vigorous and rigorous study of the programs, the 8 programs that are developed, so that we can see we're getting a return on our investment, or if we're not, we can do a course correction so that we do.
Excellent. Wow. Thank you both so much for that. And thank you for the incredible study and attention paying and the deep diving in all of this that both of you all have done, and to the whole TANF working group that really dug into all of this. And it's just obviously very, very reflected in your remarks, and much appreciated. So thank you. I'll go ahead and jump into the questions here. And I'm going to we'll have folks ask their question, and Senator Watson, Representative Hawk, you all can just kind of tag team, or however you want to just decide to respond to the questions, and certainly I'll address anything you all want me to address as well. So with that, I'm going to start with Chelsea Peterson. Chelsea, I think you should be getting, Jonathan should be sending you something to unmute you here.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Blair. Hi, gentlemen. Chelsea Peterson. I'm the state's market director for PNC Bank. PNC is now the 5th largest bank in the country with over $500 billion in assets. We're growing our presence here in Tennessee. Last year in 2020, we opened up 3 new retail locations in Middle Tennessee, and I'm based here in Nashville. But PNC is also heavily invested in supporting early childhood education, and about 16 years ago launched the PNC Grow Up Great initiative. That program has now grown to a $500 million investment in at-risk kids age 0 to 5, and is also now here in Tennessee. So from a business and workforce objective, but also from an utter importance and the understanding of the high ROI on early childhood investments, we're really pleased to see this bill and appreciate your leadership. So with that, there's so much child poverty and hardship in Tennessee, and we've been surprised to see such a large amount of the state's TANF funds sit idle. So clearly none of us want that to continue. And Senator Watson, you touched on this a bit with the ROI case study, but could you please comment on how you will ensure greater monitoring and transparency on the use of those funds going forward?
Well, the bill actually requires a report to be produced to help us track. And look, there's no fault here. I think sometimes when people look at the reserve funds that have been accumulated, they think that somehow the department or the legislature or the executive branch is at fault. It's not. We've just been very frugal in how we've utilized the resources. This is just one strategy of how we might utilize them. We look forward to a conversation both with the agencies as well as other members about other strategies. We think this is a really good one, but we just want to get out on the table that we need to look at the best ways that we can expend these resources. If they're sitting in some kind of capacity reserve, it really has no value to us. We have to utilize them to give them value. So the bill requires that a report be done outlining for us exactly how the resources are being utilized, both at the executive branch level as well as out in the community. Obviously, I'm really big on this research approach. I think by actually proving our return on investment, we will gain public confidence in the utilization of these dollars when we can prove that they're being effectively spent. I might add, while I have a moment with you, that I appreciate the contribution that you're making to early childhood education. I would encourage you to obviously to keep doing it, and if you can do more, do more, and particularly help us address the literacy challenges that we have across the state. Because while early education is important, if a child can't read, then their ability to move along in the economic spectrum is greatly restricted. So thank you for what you're doing, and hopefully the plan that we've put together here will help add to what you're doing as well.
Absolutely, thank you.
And just to reiterate, what PNC has done in Middle Tennessee has been tremendous, and I would like to see something like that replicated. And there are some entities across the state of Tennessee, but I'd like to see each of the 9 congressional districts find someone just like PNC to do the work there. I know back in Northeast Tennessee where I live, the Niswonger Foundation has done some tremendous work. And that's exactly what we're wanting to partner some of these monies with, some of these dollars with ongoing great projects that we can get a little bit more bang for our buck on. Just like what PNC has been doing. So thank you again.
Yeah, and I might add, Blair, one of the great things I think about the approach that we're taking with this bill is because we're putting it in a research space. Tennessee obviously is not the only state that has high levels of child poverty. And of our 8 programs that are being studied, maybe 3 or 4 of them become scalable to where other states look at what we're doing. And when you have the research credibility behind it, all of a sudden what you're doing is not a political kind of discussion. It's actually something that really works in a community and has benefit to to another state. And we think Tennessee, like we lead in so many other ways, this is a space that we can actually be leaders in.
Love it. Thank you. And thank you, Chelsea. All right, next question. We have Kel McDowell. Kel, you should be prompted here. So you should get a prompt to unmute yourself if you're there.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Tremendous. I'm Kel McDowell. I'm with Williamson Inc. We're the Chamber of Commerce in Williamson County. I want to thank our host and our legislators. Thank you so much. So if Tennessee has the largest surplus of TANF funds in the country, I'm hoping you could go a bit into any language that might be in the bill that ensures utilization and prevents stockpile like this in the future.
Well, as I mentioned probably in my less than adequate overview of the bill, the bill actually, once we've set aside the $100 million in our reserve, $191 million in our reserve account, the bill actually requires that every year the annual allotment that the state gets, which is currently $191 million, that it has to be exhausted. 100% of it has to be utilized. And that's where I was saying that once the department, the agency has utilized the resources for all the areas that they, overhead and SNAP and all the kind of stuff that comes out of that $191 million. Once that has been utilized, then the remainder, the balance, must be distributed to the local level based on a percentage of children living in families of poverty. So we create a strategic way of, we believe, of efficiently and effectively exhausting all of the $191 million. Now, Kel, if in a particular year, the agency has to spend more than their normal $191 million and they have to go into that reserve, then there would be no money available for the local use. And the next year we would have to replenish that $191 million before we would make available more money at the local level, if that makes sense to you.
Great.
I think Kel still is muted, but in essence, in essence, we believe that maintaining a year's worth of funding in reserve is a critical component to maintain confidence in the program, number one, but to also be sure that we adequately fund those programs which we are obligatorily required to fund.
That makes perfect sense. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Kel. All right. We have a question from Richard Kennedy. Richard, are you with us?
Hey, Blair, I am. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hey, Blair, thank you so much for organizing today. Senator Watson, Representative Hawk, it's good to see you guys. First, I want to thank you guys so much. This is really exciting, and I appreciate all of the work that you guys have already put into this and look forward to learning more about all of the efforts. So I have a magic 8-ball question for you guys. So increasingly, I am realizing the importance of managing expectations. And so an example would be that, I hear people across the state say, gosh, Richard, we have such a huge rainy day fund. Why are we not using that right now? So the magic 8-ball question to you guys is, with this reserve, can you think of an example, or can you kind of explain what the process of being able to tap into that reserve in the future would look like, and what might be a type of situation that would allow us or necessitate us to tap into that? So look forward to hearing what you guys are thinking.
I can jump on that one a little bit, Bo, because I know what your answer is going to be. Essentially, as we look at the state's overall rainy day fund, we're very cautious in Tennessee to match recurring expenses with recurring revenues. And as we are generating what has become a substantial, although still not quite where the comptroller would like to see our rainy day fund in the state of Tennessee, it's an easy question to ask. How are we going to utilize that, and what is the flintlock that goes off to create usage of that? And there's a long process that goes into that. But when we utilize any rainy day funds, more often than not, they're only going to be for some type of one-time expense. some type of a capital expenditure, whether it be a building or some type of maintenance, not even ongoing maintenance, but some type of maintenance for state facilities. So it's difficult to pull that rainy day fund down unless we're able to, on a regular recurring basis, unless we're able to recognize those dollars coming in the years to come. So Senator Watson, is that fairly close to what you were going to say?
Yeah, and Richard, I will tell you that the law surrounding what is proverbially called the rainy day fund requires that all other measures must be exhausted first before you can tap into those reserves. So you have to look at all your other expenses. So if you were to look back at last year when we adjourned early, you would have seen we basically stopped all spending at that point. We pulled back on all proposed spending measures. And because we had done that, that opened up the door to use the rainy day fund if we needed to. At the end of the day, we didn't need to, and we would only have used it to close the books on the year that we were in. So what I mean by that is when we got to June 30th, the end of the year, if we had had a gap between our expenses and our revenues, we could have used the rainy day fund to fill that gap. But the rainy day fund is not like your savings account at your bank where you can go into it and just at a moment's need draw from it. It doesn't work quite that way. Nor does the TennCare reserves, which we utilize primarily around healthcare, but could be used in our general rainy day fund. Lastly, I'll say this. Our rainy day fund, although it is healthy, is not as healthy as it needs to be. We still need a few more $100 million to get up to where the rating agencies will look at the Tennessee's financials and say, okay, this is a really solid state. Now, we're AAA rated in all three rating agencies. Part of that is because we don't go into our rainy day fund without a sheer necessity. You're also talking about kind of some different things between when we talk about the TANF fund. That's why it's not really a reserve, it's capacity. We can draw it down if we need to. Rainy day fund's completely different from that and completely operated on a different set of books.
Thank you guys so much. And Senator Watson, that differentiation between reserve and capacity was helpful. So I appreciate you guys and all you're doing.
Thank you.
It's Richard. Okay, we've got Catherine Snyder's next. Catherine, are you there? Catherine with us?
I don't think she's on right this minute.
She may have to. Okay, then let's go to Courtney Mott. Courtney, are you there with us?
Yes. Hi. Got to get myself off of unmute there. Hi, I'm Courtney Mott. I'm the Tennessee State Manager with Save the Children Action Network, or SCAN. Thanks so much to our host, TQEE. You've been such a great partner to us, and we're so excited to join you in supporting this bill. Thank you also to Senator Watson, Representative Hawk, for sponsoring this important legislation and your longtime support for the well-being of kids in Tennessee. I know you've been very supportive of Save the Children's work across the state, so thank you for that. I have two questions. My first one is about the legislation. It says that going forward, funds will be allocated to counties proportionally to their share of children in poverty. We're really excited about this change. I'd love to know a little bit about how that would work. And then my second question is, how can advocates across the state best support this bill?
Well, to your first question, we charge the Comptroller of the Treasury with helping us to determine what that number is. And we will rely on the Comptroller to analyze the various sources of data that office has. From the legislative side, we have a lot of confidence and trust in the office of the Comptroller. And so we believe that's the best office to give us advice on how we would best distribute the funds based on that rationale, if that makes sense to you, Courtney.
Yes, thank you.
To the second part, obviously speaking to legislators in your community to support the legislation or to support a strategy of how we exhaust these funds would be helpful. Emails are always nice, but there's nothing like personal interaction with a constituency, whether it's on Zoom or it's a phone call, or for those legislators that may be scheduling meetings in their office for in-person visits, and for those who are comfortable with that, having those kinds of meetings. But the real essence is for the advocacy groups is, I guess in my world, we could call it churn, is getting some churn going, talking about the legislation and talking about in your community, the legislation, talking to your local media outlets about the legislation is always would be helpful. And quite honestly, helping us to improve the legislation. We think we've got a really good bill in place right now, but I'm sure there's other ideas that could be incorporated into this bill or things that we didn't think about. Now, keep in mind, you can't do everything. You got to be reasonable about what you can do, but we're certainly open to hearing from other constituencies than the department about things that we might do to make the bill even better. As long as it includes a research component, I'm not letting anyone get off the hook without that.
Thanks so much. I love that.
And Katie, if I could add to that a little bit as well, I think as you're working with legislators and legislators across the state, I know we are at a challenging time with visits, but whenever I'm able to look at something and see this program is really helping kids, I can buy into that, and we'll certainly stand behind that. There's value to that. And as I said in the opening as well, this may help us identify some projects that are helping 50 kids, that if there could be a little influx of a little bit of cash in this, that we could help 150 kids. And that's on a very small level, but it's important to those additional 100 kids that can be helped. So looking at existing programs, if there's a way that we can support what they're doing and help them expand as well, that's critically important. As Senator Watson mentioned, and when we look at the large dollar amount of capacity that has been identified in this particular fund, it's not limitless. There are certain parameters of what we can and cannot do. It still must fit the federal guidelines of the TANF funds, the four tenets of TANF and how we can spend those dollars. So it really needs to follow the federal guidelines and the models that are in there as well. So thank you.
Representative Hawk makes a great point about, number one, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There may already be something out there that we just need to enhance and scale up. And number two, there are regulatory limitations to what we would be allowed to do. So there is some limits to what would be a program that we could fund with the resources.
Great. All right. I think we've got Catherine Snyder ready. So Catherine and Courtney, thank you for your question. Catherine, are you, we got you?
Hi, Blair.
Hi.
Yes, I can tell from your smile that you can hear me.
I can.
I'm Catherine Snyder. I'm with Nurture the Next. We are a nonprofit that works across Tennessee and 20 counties, offering evidence-based home visiting. And so appreciate both of your leadership on this bill, and would also just like to point out Senator Watson's championed evidence-based home visiting, and we appreciate his understanding of that 2-gen approach also, and the use of previously some of the TANF surplus for the expansion of that program. I have a question about this $300 million for the community 2-gen plans. Can you kind of expand on how that's different from previous 2-gen grants that the department offered, and kind of what guidelines there will be in awarding those funds?
Great question. You might be a little bit ahead of the curve on that, but here's how we envision that working. So as I explained, we're going to give $5 million, or we're going to commit $5 million to agencies developing or enhancing current programs that they have. Now, out of that $5 million, those will be in roughly $500,000 grants each. Okay. So I'll just use you as an example. What you're doing, you might apply for a $500,000 grant to either scale up or enhance the program that you currently have, which you would then present to the department and the advisory board as a program which you would like to have selected as one of the 8 to be funded for 3 years at $10 million a year, $30 million. Okay. From that, we both execute as well as study what you are doing to determine our return on investment and whether that is a program that we would need to fund in a longer term fashion than the 3 years, or it's something that we tried, it was a good idea, but it didn't get the results that we anticipated it would get. That the selection process of those 8 grants that will be 3 years in duration will be the responsibility of the department working along with the advisory board, which is made up of both executive and legislative branch members. Blair, I think I've got that correct. Is that?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. And actually, Catherine, I was glad that you brought up the 2-gen approach, because it's important to acknowledge that our Department of Human Services has put a 2-gen sort of grant program in process over recent years and recognize the value of that. This would just kind of put it on steroids, if you would, and still gives really give communities a chance to sort of work together with each other, really be strategic about designing their own plans for how, which services are most well suited to their communities and how they can really address family self-sufficiency. So I think in terms of, I think that's an important acknowledgement in the Department of Human Services in the past. And I think it just, within the federal guidelines are the federal guidelines. So those are sort of the rules around how it's to be spent, but the department would work with the advisory committee to put some parameters around the grants. And that's to Senator Watson's point, you may be ahead of your time. That's kind of, they'll put the dot the I's and cross the T's on that once the time comes.
Yeah, and just so people, because it can be confusing. So again, we set aside 300 million. Of that 300 million, we take $5 million and give it out to the community, say, okay, go and develop a program pitch, for lack of a better explanation. Then you're going to come back to the department and to the advisory board. If you think you have a program that has broad reach and is very effective, they will select 8 of those, and they will be funded at $10 million a year for 3 years with rigorous study alongside it.
Thank you. That was very helpful, because I first understood it as 8 folks would be planning in the first year, and then the same 8. But what I'm hearing is that there are more opportunities to pitch projects, and you'll decide who to fund.
Yes, Representative Hawk and I believe that there are a lot of good ideas all across the state of Tennessee. And we want to encourage people to be creative and come up with ideas. But at the end of the day, and I hope I'm not on the advisory committee, at the end of the day, they got to select 8. Now, Catherine, I'm a huge fan of home visitation. I think it has literature to support it. But if that's one that was selected, then it would go through the same kind of random controlled trials that we would put any other study of up against, and then hope that it actually proves to the public that this is a really wise and effective investment of their tax dollars, because I believe it will.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is a really exciting development for our state and for vulnerable families. So we're excited about it.
Thank you, Catherine. Well, I think with that, there are other questions in the pipeline, but I think most of them have been addressed. Thanks to Senator Bo Watson and Representative David Hawk for their very thorough explanations of these in responses to the questions. And so I think that, Lee, I think we're ready to maybe wrap up this part of our session and maybe use the last 7 or 8 minutes to just cover a couple of our other bills, our school nurse bill and the child care task force bill that Representative Hazelwood and Senator Massey, and then the school nurse bill is Representative Hawk and Senator Crow. Is that right, Lee? We on target?
Yes.
Well, and we didn't want to be presumptuous about having it seem that Representative Watson and Senator Watson and Representative Hawk were endorsing our next two bills, although we hope very much that you will. So I think Jonathan's gonna maybe we'll just make that point that even though you're still here, and I think Senator Watson, there you go, you've gone on to attendee status, and Representative Hawk, you may be called on in a minute just to comment on the school nurse bill. I was just gonna, Lee, shall I go ahead and just briefly touch on the child care bill?
Sure.
This is, Jonathan, would you put up the slide? Let's see, put up the child care slide that starts with, there we go. This was just, in fact, I'm gonna let you just go ahead right to the first slide that is, yeah, that was the sponsors of the report. There we go, this one. So this is 2019, TQEE produced a report. We surveyed 2,300 parents of children under the age of 5 across the state, and we also engaged an economist to help us sort of crunch the data. And we really wanted to kind of put some data to what we were hearing anecdotally about childcare challenges just being rampant across the state for parents, and its impact on workforce productivity and labor participation and economic, frankly, economic progress. And so what you see here, this slide here really just is the summary of the results. On the left-hand side of the slide, you can see essentially that 35% of parents reported having pay or hours reduced or changed to part-time as a result of insufficient childcare. 32% had to quit a job, were fired or demoted. 39% turned down new job offer or promotion, and 33% turned down education or training opportunities. If you look at the right side, what were they saying was the biggest challenges that they were facing to do with childcare? What was causing this? 50% of them said that they were having difficulty finding sufficient quality care. 63, so 2/3 basically said they're having really difficulty affording childcare, and another 2/3 said they were having trouble accessing childcare, meaning were there enough slots, were the slots during their work hours, et cetera, or near or convenient to their homes. So pretty big impact. The next slide, Jonathan. The next slide just shows the economist's work for sort of translating this into economic impact. And the result was annual economic losses in Tennessee due to insufficient childcare. Total impact was $1.34 billion annually. Parents bore the largest sort of brunt of that, if you will, $850 million in lost earnings. Businesses, $270 million annually in lost revenues as a result, and taxpayers, $220 million. So I just wanted to set the stage for this child care bill. This is really just so appreciative of Senator Massey and Representative Hazelwood. I think we all recognize that the pandemic has worsened the child care situation. We don't have new data on that, but certainly anecdotally we have it. There have been national reports and data that have indicated that, and I'm sure it's the same situation in Tennessee. Many child care have just not been able to withstand the economic stresses of the pandemic, and have closed and may not be able to reopen. So this bill is very simple. There are a lot of challenges to addressing this child care system, but this bill would essentially set forth a task force, put in place a task force that will work together with the Department of Human Services, with the Department of Education, and a couple other divisions to do several things. Number one, would develop a strategic plan. That's the main thing. They'll develop a strategic action plan. And this is not a plan that sits on a shelf. This is a strategic action plan to guide the administration and the General Assembly on how to address the challenges of quality, affordability, and access to childcare, how to more effectively use public resources. We know there's another federal funding stream, childcare, the CCDF, Childcare and Development Fund. We have actually in recent years, past 5 years, not this most recent year, but prior to that, we've been leaving a lot of those funds on the table, over 200 million actually, and those don't stockpile like TANF funds. Those are forfeited to other states. So knowing we have this issue, we want to look at how to better use those resources. We want to also really leverage the business sector, build some partnerships between government and business. And further, the last thing the plan would also do is streamline coordination between the different departments that have a stake or investment or involvement in childcare, and that's Human Services. Our Department of Education actually also runs a childcare program, a whole kind of separate sort of programs and standards and monitoring systems. Department of Economic Community Development has a stake in this, and Department of Labor and Workforce Development does. So this is a great bill. It's very timely. It's time for us to really sort of set some goals, strategies, plan to where we want to be, how we want to address, what do we want to see in terms of outcomes for affordability, quality, and access, and then set a plan to get us there. And so I'm excited about this bill and appreciate the two bill sponsors. And let's see, I'm gonna wait. I know we have a few people who want to and will comment on this for us. We're gonna go a little bit past the hour we had allotted for this, but this is being recorded. So if anyone has to miss it or sign off, then these will be available later. So I'm gonna just take a quick moment, and Lee, let you go ahead and just cover the school nurse bill. And then we'll open it up for those comments if we still have the commenters with us.
Sure, thanks, Blair. I will be brief. As you all know, school nurses are funded somewhat at the state level, but with the bulk of funding coming from local funds. The state's education funding formula, the basic education program, was created in 1992. And with the creation of that formula, one school nurse was generated for every 3,000 students across the state. And we're coming up next year on 30 years of the creation of that formula, and that ratio has not changed. We are still at one school nurse per 3,000 students. The national best practice by all the appropriate associations and organizations are one school nurse per school, or at least every 750 students. And I'm going to turn it over briefly to Representative Hawk, who is the House sponsor of this proposal, to talk to you about that proposal and his and our efforts to get us closer to that ideal mark. David.
Thank you, Lee. I appreciate that. This has been an ongoing effort for 5 or 6 years. So this is not a new thought or a new idea. I want to start my video. Okay, there we go. This is something that we've been discussing for quite some time, and actually had the thought in queue with the BEP, the Basic Education Program Review Committee, had endorsed this legislation several years ago. And then the unfortunate need for school resource officers jumped ahead of us in terms of funding. So very critically an important program there, but our school nurses, we still need to give more attention to that issue as we go forward. Philosophically, I think everyone in the legislature agrees with it. I think it's something that we all see value in. And what's occurring now, many school systems, although the funding is one nurse for every 3,000 students, there are several school systems across the state of Tennessee that are doing what Lee just mentioned, are funding one nurse per school building. So they're using their own local resources and revenues for that. What we're trying to do for those school systems is free up those dollars that are being spent locally now for nurses to go back into the classroom, to better utilize those dollars in classroom needs so they can do more with what they've got locally. Also, we've got some rural counties, some rural school districts across Tennessee that don't have the nurses in place. So this is going to allow many of those districts to get more nurses within their school districts. And for those school districts who are already biting the local bullet and using those funds there, it's going to allow them to better utilize those dollars on in-classroom needs that they've got. So I think the last fiscal note we saw was in the $40 million range. We hope to be able to find some of that. And the BEP formula itself, as Lee mentioned, coming up on 30 years. I know there's a task force that's looking at I guess it's BEP 3.0 now. We've already been at BEP 2.0. We're looking at 3.0 to see exactly what that looks like in the future. So this is a critically important issue as we're seeing students with more and more medical issues that are in our school systems. I go to my fourth graders' school on a weekly basis, and the students with IEPs there is growing. So we've got to better address the nursing population within our school system. So thank you. And again, as with other pieces of legislation, we certainly ask for support of all those that are viewing this call.
Thanks, David. Well, Blair, we'll turn it back over to you to wrap up.
Yeah, great. Well, we had several people who I knew wanted to make comments about, at least about the child care bill and the TANF bill. Connie Kasha, Phil Acord, and Melanie Shinbaum. So if you guys are able to be still with us, Jonathan, you can, if you can see who's with us among those three, might just, there we go. There's Connie. Hey, Connie.
Hi, Blair. Thank you for having me. And thank you to Senator Massey and Representative Hazelwood for this awesome bill. I just typed in the chat because I do have to get off here for another meeting, but I really appreciate the task force looking at the inequalities in our childcare system. As we know from our Building Strong Brains research, and I love the focus on research because in scientific, reasons for doing the things that we do to make those things successful. But looking at that child then being the beginning of education, of workforce development, of healthy citizenship. And so I really appreciate the look at including all of those entities. This is not a childcare issue. This is a community, a statewide issue. And we all need to be working together on the same level, to make sure that our children are off to a good start, and so that our families are off to a good start as well. I didn't say who I am, I guess. So again, Connie Kasha, and I am the president of the Tennessee Association for Children's Early Education, which primarily is an organization of child care providers across the state. And we are behind this bill 100%. We will be working to help get it passed and do whatever we can to help support that. So I look forward to being able to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. Much appreciated. Thanks for staying with us another couple minutes.
All right, I'm gonna head off.
All right, Phil is next. Phil Acord.
Thank you. Phil Acord, CEO of Chambliss Center for Children in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I'm sorry, my Senator Watson has gone. I wanted to compliment him for, I recognize those charts on the wall. He does that with us all the time when we go to his office to try to challenge him on something. So, but anyway, I guess my comment would be supportive certainly of Senator Watson and Senator Hawk, for their efforts to look. Oh, I see you're back now. Huh? So, I guess to the layperson out there and the child care administrator, Chambliss Center in Chattanooga, when we're full of capacity, when we're not COVID, pre-COVID, we were taking care of about 800 children a day, from infants all the way up to, we have residential and transitional living, so all the way up to 22 years of age. But, I'm glad the General Assembly is looking at how to utilize the TANF funds, and especially that part of the TANF pot that has early childhood, because, we're struggling. We had a lot of programs closed during COVID. We normally struggle, but, and I appreciate Senator Watson talking about the governor's literacy, and early childhood education, quality early childhood education programs lay the foundation for literacy. We give the children the types of stimuli and interaction to lay that groundwork. And so, we need support, but we know that we're an industry that's not very well organized, and that we have such issues, and so I'm so supportive of Representative Hazelwood and Representative Massey's attempt to look at us as an industry and look at our infrastructure and look at how our funding comes in. And we have teachers that working in classrooms with children that qualify for housing subsidy and food stamps. So we just there's a couple thousand of us that are regulated. We're taking care of a lot of children in our state, and we need all the support and help that we can get, because we understand the basic building blocks of the community is families. And families are made up of children. Those children need support, But I agree, you know, it needs to be research based. You know, we need to be doing the assessment, the evaluation. They need to make sure they're getting a return on the investment that the community is. You know, I'm proud of Chattanooga in that, you know, we've established an Office of Early Learning. You know, our Chamber of Commerce has Early Matters, you know, that's trying to pull together a collaboration of educators to be more efficient and to offer that support to administrators of entrepreneurs, you know, that own their own programs, you know, how to help them be more business minded. And I know DHS is got CCR and R that's doing some business training stuff like that. So we need a lot of help. And I know Senator Watson knows that because I've been his ear 1,000 times. And I don't know Representative Hawk, but he seems like a good guy too. And I support your nursing bill too. I mean, there's so many things out there that need funding, you know, and there's only so many dollars to go around, but we definitely need all the help that we can get to support the families and children so that every child in Tennessee has access to quality early childhood education and can be successful. That's certainly going to help us move along economically too. So great meeting, great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you so much. And thanks for the great work that you do every single day. Really much appreciated. I think our last person is Melanie Shinbaum. And then after Melanie's comments, we'll wrap it up. Hi, Melanie.
Hi, Blair. Thanks so much. Yeah, my name is Melanie Shinbaum. I'm the CEO at St. Luke's Community House in Middle Tennessee. We've been operating in the West Nashville community for over 100 years, serving all the way, you know, infants, families, all the way to seniors. But relevant to this, we operate a licensed 3-star childcare center. And we prioritize enrollment of and care for children of lower income families who would otherwise be even more challenged to find and access that needed care. I just wanted to share that we see firsthand the critical need for this affordable, accessible, high quality childcare talked about today. Women, especially women of color, like Phil said, many of our employees fall into these same categories who are also trying to serve the children. But they're being adversely affected by this daunting reality. And the pandemic, to Blair, your point, has only exacerbated that. I just think there's a dire need to address this system, and I'm excited about this opportunity to get this task force together and think it could really ultimately create this plan that would strategically move us forward in our support of these families. And then just also the support around how to access these TANF funds. And so just wanted to share that I appreciate Senator Massey's and Representative Hazelwood's leadership on that, as well as both of your all's, Representative Hawk and Senator Watson, regarding those TANF funds. Just know that all of these opportunities are critical, and just wanted to say that on behalf of our communities and states, children, and families.
Thank you so much, Melanie. I appreciate that. And again, appreciate what you do too, really do, and on the front lines, as they say. So I think that concludes our Q&A, Lee, and the bulk of our program. Do you want to say a few comments about what's next?
Yes, feel free to stay in touch. In the very near future, you'll get correspondence from me outlining different ways for you to be engaged and for you to advocate on behalf of the TANF bill, the Child Care Task Force bill, as well as the school nurse bill. Please take advantage of those, share those with colleagues, with other groups you might communicate with on a regular basis. It's going to truly take a grassroots and lobbying effort. So that networking, that coalition building will be crucial to all of these pieces of legislation. I want to one more time thank you wholeheartedly to Senator Watson and Representative Hawk, who's taken from their time to participate not just in today's webinar, but also one for West tomorrow and then one for East Tennessee on Friday. So thank you so much for those efforts. If we can answer any questions in the meantime before you get back to us, please feel to reach out to me, lharrell@tqee.org. And Blair, unless you have anything else to add, we are adjourned.